If your site operates in regions with privacy regulations like GDPR, which impacts the European Economic Area, also called the EEA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, or other regions around the world, you have to ask your visitors for their consent choices, and then you have to respect what they pick. You might also not be required to conform to these privacy regulations, but you want to give your website visitors a choice in how they're tracked. Either way, you need to make sure that GA4 is receiving and respecting consent signals correctly. Many websites have consent banners or cookie notices, but often they're not properly set up or integrated with GA4, which can lead to compliance issues and inaccurate data collection. In this lesson, we'll check if consent signals are being properly received by GA4 and what impact they have on your data collection. This is a bit more technical than some of our audit points, but it's crucial to get it right. The easiest way to check if consent signals are being properly sent to GA4 is to open the website and look behind the curtain to see if consent signals exist. Make sure you've installed the plugin linked in the resources, the Consent Mode Inspector, and then make sure to pin it to your toolbar as you can see here. Then you're going to right-click and choose Manage Extension. What you want to double check is to scroll down and see if Allow an Incognito is turned on. If it isn't, turn it on, because I find it a lot easier to just open a new incognito window in Chrome every time I want to test consent mode, instead of having to clear all of my cookies and starting over again. Now we are going to open an incognito window, 3 dots, new incognito window, and then let's go to cookiebot.com. This is the consent management platform we recommend and use, and I want to see how it's set up. Here we are in cookiebot.com, and we have the consent choices here. Now before we select anything, let's take a look at the extension. You can see it's showing a green flag now. And then if you take a look at it, you can see that you have the consent choices set up as denied for everything except for security storage. You can also see this GCS parameter up here. It says G100. What does that mean? GCS stands for Google Consent State. If you don't see this parameter at all, consent mode likely isn't implemented, or it is implemented, but being tracked in a way that it hasn't been picked up by the extension. For example, let's open a new tab and we're going to do a Google search. Now I've done my Google search, and you can see this is a red flag, and if I open this up, you can see that the payload is GCS is none. That doesn't necessarily mean that Google isn't respecting consent mode. It probably means that there wasn't anything the extension could listen for. This can also happen if you go to a website that doesn't use GA4, such as Fathom Analytics. Fathom Analytics is another analytics tool that I like that's developed here in Vancouver Island where I live. They don't use GA4, of course, so if I open this up, there's no GCS parameter to listen for. GCS is specific to GA4. Now let's go back to Cookiebot and click on the extension again and consider what the different GCS parameter options could be. If it's G100, it means that both ad storage and analytic storage are denied. If it's G101, that means that ad storage is denied and analytic storage is granted. G110 means that ad storage is granted and analytic storage is denied. And finally, G111 means that both ad storage and analytic storage are granted. Before you accept cookies, you should typically see G100 as you see here. If you see a message asking you to make a choice, like this message here, but then the GCS parameter is G111, that's a problem. That means that the website is sending data off to GA4 as if you had said yes to all the cookies. If we now click on Deny for all the cookies and go to another page on the website, the Google Consent Mode, for example, and then we click on the plugin again, you can see it still says G100, and now we have the update state that's also been populated because I did make a choice, and that choice was to deny all cookies. This state is what's called cookieless in GA4. GA4 will see the page view and what we do on that page view, but each subsequent page view is I'm a brand new person as no cookies were set. Let's close this incognito window. We're going to open another one, and then we're going to go to Cookiebot again. And now I'm going to visit a page without actually making another choice. For example, I'm going to go to their product page. I still haven't made a choice. I still see the consent dialog coming up here. And if I click here, you can see that the payload is still G100. And that is exactly what it should say. It's against many privacy regulations to just assume someone accepts cookies if they visit another page. That's another issue that I often see come up. Now let's go back to the dialog, and we're going to customize, and we're going to say yes to statistics, but leave everything else as no, and then click on Allow Selection. Now I'm going to open the extension again, and you can see that our parameter has now changed to G101, as it should as ad storage denied and analytic storage is granted. Now let's take a look inside GA4, what you'll see at that end if consent signals are received properly. In the admin, we're going to click on consent settings right here, and then you'll see if consent settings are being received at all by the property. This means that the GCS parameters attach the data that goes off to GA4. Realistically, this is really an all or nothing area. Either everything says yes or nothing says yes. I rarely see where one section is receiving consent signals correctly, but the other ones are not. Now, let's see what it looks like if no consent signals are received, which is ironically in Google's demo property. Again, remember that may be the case you don't actually have to ask for consent, and so you aren't doing that. In this case, you can see that there's no consent set up on the website, and it says right here that the stream only receives a very small amount of traffic from the EEA, so they've decided they don't need to request any consent at all. It is good to check this percentage, because if it is higher than 0 to 5%, they probably should be setting up some sort of consent management, even if they don't actively sell to people who live in the EEA. Always better to cover yourself than expose yourself to potential risk and fines down the road. If you're not seeing the GCS parameter in your GA4 requests, or if the values don't change when users interact with your consent banner, there's absolutely a disconnect between your consent management platform and GA4. This typically happens because either the consent management platform isn't sending signals that are getting picked up correctly by Google's consent mode, or you're using hard-coded or older style GA4 tags directly on the site without consent mode integration. There's a lot of different ways to fix this, and it really depends on what consent management platform you're using. I recommend checking the documentation for the platform you're using, but generally this involves making sure your consent platform is sending consent signals and that your Google tags are able to listen to those consent signals. You might also choose you want to totally block GA4 from receiving any data until consent is granted. That means that you aren't sending any data at all, not even the cookieless data that I mentioned earlier. In that case, you'd want to wait to send any GA4 tags at all until a consent signal of some kind is generated by the visitor. This is the absolute safest method of tracking when it comes to GA4, beyond not using GA4 at all, of course. Before we finish off this lesson, I also want to review two things that are outside of GA4. First, check what the consent banner is actually promising users. If they say no to ads cookies, make sure that no ads cookies are set, for example. Common mistakes I see here are people putting all the various tags in Google Tag Manager and then saying the GTM itself is required, which means that all those tags are firing even if you say no to ads tracking. That's obviously bad. GTM is not required as a whole, and tags should be individually firing based on consent states. If your consent management platform doesn't allow for that level of control, find another platform. As I mentioned, we're big fans of Cookiebot. You also need a place on your website where users can change their consent choices. That can be something like a cookies page is linked to in the footer, or Cookiebot provides a floating widget that can be used to change consent during a user's website session. The implementation is really up to you, but it does need to exist. This consent stuff can be pretty tricky, so if you're running into any odd issues, please leave a note in the community, and I can definitely take a look.